Agricultural societies have a dubious and problematic view on sexuality. In the last 10,000 years or so, our relationship with it has been shaped by organized religions. They created a set of rules and rituals to control sexuality, both male and female. But as the time went by, control shifted more towards the control of female sexuality. If you observe the sacred, holy texts, especially of Abrahamic religions, written by men, usually by men who had little to no contact with women, and from the perspective of the original sin. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This episode, or episodes about Bronze Age sexuality, Bronze Age art, and how 3,500-year-old Bronze Age illiterate shepherds that lived in the desert influenced sexuality for generations to come, even today. These episodes will be written when I get to the art of the Bronze Age. Let me get back to the track. I assume that you have listened to the episode 8. In the beginning of agricultural societies, the rituals regarding sexuality varied from culture to culture, from one historical epoch to another. These rituals, developed independently in unrelated cultures, served as a role of control. However, hunter-gatherer societies of today, which have maintained the way of life for tens, even hundreds of thousands of years, provide insights. By studying contemporary hunter-gatherer societies and observing primates in the wild, we can gain insights into what sexuality looked like in the distant past. Sexuality of ancient hunter-gatherer societies and their people was, as is today, almost opposite of what we, so-called civilized societies, practice all over the world, especially where Abrahamic religions took their roots. Why? Because of jealousy. Both females and males experience jealousy. But what is jealousy really? It's the fear of not being enough or capable of pleasing your partner. Imagine a person saying to their partner, "Don't go to that party." What this person is really saying is, "I'm afraid I cannot satisfy you, and you might find someone else who can, or someone more interesting than me." The real self-doubt is the core of all jealousy. The individual becomes obsessed, loses self-respect and dignity, and ends up losing the loved one anyway. And where does the self-doubt come from? Fear. Fear of losing the loved one. It's a vicious circle. In hunter-gatherer societies, self-interest, whether in collecting of food or the demand for sex in a possessive manner, poses a threat to the tribe. This remains a fact today as it was for our ancestors. Jealousy, or needy sexual possessiveness, is experienced differently by women and men. Males developed a philosophy that revolves around the gains or losses. Sharing is not an option, especially when it comes to sexual partner. On the other hand, women are often more concerned about emotional intimacy or emotional infidelity than sexual intercourse. Jealousy is a part of human nature. However, we also possess a reflective nature. Every time someone is honest with themselves, and then with the world, admitting who they truly are and standing up to share the truth, the world becomes a more interesting and better place. In some tribes of hunter-gatherers, romantic love, and therefore monogamy, and ultimately marriage, is a foreign concept. Sex, like hunger or thirst, needs to be satisfied. We, like our ancestors, are capable of being attracted to more than one person. We, like our ancestors, can like more than one person. We, like our ancestors, can love more than one thing: films, food, music, friends, places, books, podcasts, you name it. If we love and like multiple things, why not multiple people in a romantic or sexual way? Because our Western society doesn't allow access to sexuality, as it has been a tightly controlled commodity for at least the last 3,000 years. The generation of people who lived like this, who were subscribed to this, cannot disappear overnight. The sexual revolution in 1960s started to change all of that, but we need more education. What if we learn growing up that true love is possessive and obsessive? Songs and film portrayed a man standing in the rain waiting for the girl, stalking her, trying to do everything to make her, quotation marks, his. What if we valued the autonomy of those we love? Our ancestors had more liberal sexual morality, viewing their sexual practice as bonding devices, not solely for procreation. The narrative of modern science, anthropology, archaeology, history, carries moralistic biases of today, which are too often projected into history. We cannot judge our ancestors, regardless of the historical epoch, using our collective experiences and morals as a standard model. For example, our ancestors, living in Paleolithic, didn't store food. They lived primarily by hunting and gathering. But they didn't starve. Analysis of their bones, much like tree rings indicating drought and wet years, showed that they were well nourished and prolonged periods of starvation were rare, even extremely rare. The first generation who settled down and depended on harvest experienced more hunger, even extended periods of no food. I keep telling you about the San people, the oldest tribe in the world, with the oldest DNA and the oldest form of language. But there is one more reason. They live in the Kalahari Desert, and their daily intake of calories is healthier than our civilized Western society. A day or two of food gathering and hunting, followed by a few days of leisure. They have open resources and transportable possessions. When we observe them and other hunter-gatherers, it leads to the conclusion that Paleolithic ancestors had healthier lives. With the advent of agriculture, our ancestors' height and average lifespan plummeted. The first farmers were shorter than their Paleolithic ancestors. Was agriculture the worst mistake in human history? To this day, we are still struggling with the agricultural mess, both in food and the control of sexuality. If people had abundance of food and shelter, if they shared everything, from childcare to sexual partners and food, how did they choose their leaders? Their leaders couldn't ask the obedience as agricultural leaders. There was no authority over one another if food and shelter is provided. Maybe these leaders were shamans or artists, someone who can transcend this world in some form. Who knows? So what does this have with the art? Well, in order to explain how art was made, the circumstances of art creation, such as dildos and figurines of women, I have to dwell in the psychology of our ancestors. By explaining their world, perhaps I will manage to explain us. In the lives of our ancestors, food gathering and hunting quests were so successful that people often found themselves with leisure time on their hands. Was art made out of boredom? Ancient hunter-gatherers, like their modern counterparts, spent their time eating, playing, telling stories, and procreating. In this environment, storytelling, reenacting, or simply acting, and eventually sculpture and painting were created. The Venus figurines are small statues from the Upper Paleolithic period depicting a woman under the category of portable art. While most have been discovered in Europe, some have been found in a location distant as Siberia. Dating mostly from the Gravettian period, 26 to 21,000 years ago, these figurines vary in materials including soft stone, bone, ivory, or clayed fire into ceramics, with over 200 known examples, typically ranging up to 40 centimeters in height. But there is also older ones, made 40 to 35,000 years ago. Characterized by wide hips and legs, these figurines often lack arms, feet, and facial features, with exaggerated abdomen, hips, breasts, thighs, and vulva. Some show detailed hairstyles or clothing or tattoos. The precise cultural significance of these figurines may forever elude us. Archaeologists speculate that they could symbolize security, fertility, or mother goddess. Despite being considered one of the most debated topics in archaeology, Venus figurines remain relatively understudied. As I said, the original cultural significance of these artifacts remains unknown. It has been speculated that they serve ritual or symbolic purposes. Interpretations range widely, from religious symbols to expression of health and fertility or grandmother goddess. Were they crafted by other women based on self-observation? We can only speculate. Maybe without access to mirrors or some kind of surfaces of a lake or a river, women likely use alternative methods for self-representation. It is challenging to confirm. Also, it has been suggested that the sizes and shape of the figurines could symbolize women in pregnancy, even some kind of a deity of childbirth. Were their bodies some kind of an ideal for Ice Age men? Were overnourished women being idealized for their perceived ability to survive and reproduce? Who knows? Was it an archetype of a female supreme creator? Who knows what it really was? The next episode that I'm working on, I've selected around 20 of these sculptures, and I will speak about the history of their discoveries, places, details of the sculpture, style, and dating. It will be a single episode. However, I have my favorite, and I will dedicate a separate episode of the art stories. This concludes this episode. I don't know else what to say in this episode. I want to thank you for joining and listening. I hope I inspired you. I hope you learned something.